This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Play. Okay, so welcome to our 7th Youth Peer Workforce Community of Practice, and we're going to be talking about burnout, self-care, and workplace support. So hopefully we can still have some good discussions today, even though there's only a few of us, and I will send these out for those of you who aren't here. So today we're going to go over burnout and vicarious trauma, just like some of the signs of those, and kind of talk about like what that might look like for you in your role, some things you can do to address burnout before it happens and when it happens, and kind of how you can talk to your supervisor about burnout and steps you can take. What does a trauma-informed workplace look like, and what is trauma-informed care, and then what does self-care look like for you, and how can you make a self-care plan for maintenance and when you're facing burnout or you're in kind of like a crisis situation. Then we'll close. Okay, so our learning objectives for today. After today, you'll be able to recognize the signs of burnout and vicarious trauma, address burnout before and when it happens, identify what makes a workplace trauma-informed, and what tools you can use to shift your workplace culture, and assess your current self-care habits and make a plan for maintenance and emergency self-care. So we can start with a discussion. Why can't I see this on both screens?
I don't know.
Anyways, so have you gotten burnt out at a previous job? What does that look like? And then does that look different from getting burnt out doing peer work?
Well, I guess I feel like I go through cycles of feeling burnt out, reprioritizing self and community care, and feeling like I can take on more things and then getting burnt out again. And I don't think doing peer work burnout is different than organizing burnout or other work burnout that I've done. Different tasks have caused the burnout or different reasons because the work is different, but the feelings are kind of the same for me.
So we were both opening our mouths and saying the same thing. I think of like that just really makes sense. Were you gonna add anything more to that?
Yeah, no, that sounds correct. And it sounds like with community organizing, that is something that you also put a lot of like passion and emotion into, which is similar with peer work, I think. When you're investing like yourself a lot into the work, I think that's different. Like, I mean, I think like for me, like before I did peer work, I was also in a helping profession. But before I did that, I was working as a cashier at Safeway, so I was getting burnt out from that. But I think it looked very different, where I was getting burnt out because I felt like the work I was doing was just like meaningless, you know. So, yeah, I think with like organizing and peer work, I could see how that could be very similar, though. Like, yeah, what's causing it could be different.
Well, and I like how you mentioned cycles, because I think that's very much my current crusade is the fact that like burnout does not have to be your career ender. So like I think it is sometimes cyclical, where like things get really intense for a while and you got to figure out how to work with that. And then like part of treating burnout is like taking space and trying to take a little bit of time and having a real focus on recovery from it. And that doesn't mean that you're gonna never have burnout again. Like it definitely can come back up, but having the tools to work with it, try to prevent it, and also recognize it as it's happening to keep it from getting out of hand is really important.
Cool.
So just a heads up, we're trying to figure out how to see the chat box. So we don't know if anybody's chatted anything in. So that was the extended pause. Sorry about that.
Yeah, let me just...
I can't see anything in the chat box, this is Julianne, but I'm happy to tell you if someone writes something in the chat box.
That's perfect. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so next question, does your workplace do anything to prevent burnout or support wellness? And I'll just throw the other one in here too. What do you do for self-care currently?
Ashley, do you want to answer this question first this time?
Sorry to put you guys on the spot since there's only two of you. A lot of pressure.
Sorry, I was just thinking some things that we do for like preventing burnout or supporting wellness is we're really big on mental health days here at PSU on our team with a like if you notice yourself having a really, really hard time getting out of bed and it's been like 2 hours and you're like, it's okay, my hours are flexible, I can get to work late kind of a thing, maybe take that as a recognition of like either work from home or like being able to take the day and be like, I will be able to get everything that I need to get done today, done tomorrow. And I will be better able to do that if I take the day today. So we have it so that our sick time can be used for mental health time as well.
Yeah, I think the accommodation of being able to work from home is really helpful too, because sometimes you can still work, but you might not be able to get yourself into the office or just
you can work in pajamas.
Yeah, exactly. Do you guys have anything different that your organizations do to support like a culture of wellness? Are you allowed to use like, are you supported, do you feel supported asking for mental health days?
I think it's inconsistent support, but when it's going well, people are allowed to take leave without pay, even if you don't have any earned sick or vacation time. You're able to like somewhat set your own schedule within the work week. Somewhat, if it's really outside the regular hours, then you have to get permission, and that can help. And we have the Family Medical Leave Act law that protects us, that helps, which every workplace that's large enough will have that. And we have a wellness committee, but it's been a little at some points we've been able to use paid time to put on wellness events for our coworkers, and at other times we haven't been allowed to do that. So when we haven't been allowed to do that, we've been more focused on how do we bring games or icebreakers to all staff meetings or how do we change the location of the all staff meeting so we can sit in a circle instead of rows, or like do things that support community building. But we're just getting started, so I'm sure there's going to be more down the line once we figure out what is best. And in terms of what I do for self-care, I do a type of peer support that is completely separate from the mental health system called co-counseling or reevaluation counseling, and that has been super, super helpful and allows me to keep going even when I feel like I can't.
That's really cool. I love that y'all put on like wellness stuff too. Do you have any examples that you can share?
Sure. Someone did like a healing through art thing, or someone put on a yoga class. We also took advantage of things in the community. So, like, just downstairs from us, the school district put on a free salsa class, for example, that included childcare. So we invited everybody in both offices, if they wanted to come and dance together for free, that they could do that.
That's neat.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Ashley, did you want to add anything? Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's
We were switching to me leading this one. Okay, so this part's about burnout, vicarious trauma, and compassion stress. So burnout is recognized by the World Health Organization, and it's caused by chronic cumulative stress at work, so ongoing stress that just kind of adds up. Feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficacy are all things that kind of go into describing burnout. And it can happen at any job, but it is most common in helping professions, which includes peer support and also organizing. So
totally.
hits it on the head.
Okay.
So signs of burnout. Now Maria gets to do all the clicking. All right.
Yes.
Signs of burnout include disillusionment, cynicism about work or life in general, irritability, fatigue, compassion fatigue, inability to concentrate, headaches, anxiety, absenteeism, and others. What does burnout look like for you? I know you've mentioned that it's kind of been a cycle. I think Julianne was the one that said that, but it's been mentioned that it can be kind of a cycle. So it sounds like there's been some experience with it. What does it look like?
Well, for me, it's a feeling of meaninglessness. Like, I'm just keeping the system going and I'm not actually helping to end systems of oppression, or feeling like I'm actively causing harm instead of helping, and fantasizing about doing other things or about other stuff that seems more important or meaningful. And maybe this falls under irritability, but like a kind of rage about things that are unfair or oppressive, or harmful, that are part of, those aspects are part of any profession that you could possibly, any way to make money under capitalism has some kind of compromise attached to it. And it just gets to me harder when I'm burned out. Whereas when I'm well resourced, I understand that I'm making compromises, but I have a bigger picture in mind, and I can tell I'm still working towards those goals, even despite the failures of the current system that we all live under.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I mean, that seems like it could fit under the irritability just fine, but I definitely know what you mean by the raging against it, because it's so, that's something for me too. It's really easy for me to get wrapped up in the outrage of it all, because it can be really frustrating and beyond frustrating. But when I do have that good grounding of like, here's why I'm here, this is what I'm doing well, there's the meaning in it, you can combat that and like kind of comfort that rage of like there's action being done. But yeah, when it's hard to, when the burnout is happening, like you don't necessarily see all of that.
Mhm. I think you put it really well, and we kind of get into this a little bit in the causes of burnout, but that the system itself is kind of traumatizing, and working within these systems that are so depleted and inefficient and ineffective and
Sometimes
short
set up that way
staffed.
to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be just really depressing. And yeah, so I think like it's really good that it seems like you're on the next step of recognizing, what you're upset about and mad about and, fatigued about.
Yeah. And sometimes for me, these look like general my mental health shit that I deal with. So like I deal with anxiety every day. I deal with fatigue every day. I have a hard time concentrating fairly often.
Yeah.
But when it gets to kind of a like, wow, this is really impeding my ability to like drive to work or like go to school and sit through an hour and a half class, like, come on, it's just an hour and a half. So like usually I can handle that, but why am I suddenly having a hard time with this? And that sometimes is a like, oh.
Definitely.
Look at that might be burnout.
Yeah.
Or at least impending burnout.
Yeah.
Work with that and let's see what we can do.
This is a sign that it's coming.
So vicarious trauma, it's similar to burnout in the fact that it is cumulative and results from working with survivors of trauma. Signs include difficulty talking about your feelings, overeating or undereating, sometimes both, where you undereat all day and then you're like, wow, I'm starving. Guilty. Difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, losing sleep over clients, dreaming about your clients and maybe their trauma experiences, worry that you are not doing enough for your clients, free-floating anger or irritation. This again gets back to some of that rage that was mentioned, being jumpy, dealing with intrusive thoughts of clients and their trauma histories, feelings of hopelessness associated with work and clients, and feeling trapped by work. So what contributes to burnout and vicarious trauma? Systemic stress. So many of the systems we work with are overloaded and or broken and sometimes set up that way. So it can add to the frustration, especially I feel like as peers, because we've had to deal with those systems in very personal ways, and now seeing it impact other people at the same time can be, it can be really, really hard. Feeling ineffective, organizational chaos. So that's when you're working in an agency where you just don't have, maybe you don't have role clarity, maybe you don't have a self-care culture of self-care, you don't have a system of, or an idea of like, wow, like, shit's not going well, who do I check in with about this? Or maybe you have a person to check in with, but they're never actually available, that kind of a thing. And workload. So part of the helping services or the helping professions is that often you're overworked and underpaid, and there's not much like sight in the future of relief coming. Lack of work-life balance, lack of organizational support. Okay, so I guess I mentioned some of these already.
Yeah.
And unclear job expectations. Jump the gun. All right, so
kind of went over that.
Yeah, we kind of talked a little bit about when you're aware of signs that you're that you may be experiencing burnout, and then this is a good one. So, what are some certain things that kind of contribute to burnout? So, is there any situation where you're like, okay, so I should prepare for this because it's taxing me a bit more than other situations do?
Can I add to some of the causes of burnout?
Yeah, sure.
Honestly, I feel like some of my biggest triggers for burnout have to do with things that aren't just in the work itself. Like um, the the visibility of oppression in the larger world um, is really hard. So if there's a lot of extreme weather events that come from the climate crisis, and I have friends who are impacted by that, that's going to make it harder to do my job and feel like my job matters. If I have, someone who's a person of color shot by the police, that's going to make it, who's a friend of mine, that's going to make it harder to like focus at work and feel like what I'm doing matters. If, looking and reading the reports of like what's happening to like the caging of migrants, particularly children, and like all of our southern relatives, like that's super painful, and it has an impact for me in the work that I do every day, even though I'm like, even if the thing isn't directly happening to me, if it's happening to my broader community or I see it in the world, I think it has an impact on me, and it also has an impact on a lot of the youth that I work with if they're connected to that particular community that's being impacted, whether or not they're aware that it has an impact. If it's impacting their families are having increased stress and it's coming out in particular ways. And so I think that's one of the main causes that I struggle with.
Yeah, I definitely hear you. I was just having this conversation with one of our coworkers, and I've even had this conversation outside of work. But it's so hard sometimes to navigate the world as it is right now, because it is just kind of highly traumatic in general. So it's hard sometimes being like the climate change one really hit me, and then I was struggling the other day with the caging, the concentration camps that we have going on right now. It's just like how can I keep doing what I'm doing when there's all of this other stuff going on, kind of a thing. So I definitely that resonates with me a lot.
Yeah.
Just how that can also cause burnout. Like, I think that's a great point of looking at, like, the world in general has stuff going on, and it's going to impact your work, even when it's not necessarily like, all right, today at work we are going to talk about climate change, or we're going to talk about the fact that there are literal, like, people are literally being caged, and, like, so that's not happening directly at work, but it might come up in conversation, and it's something that is happening around time. So that makes sense to me.
And then it does, I mean, I think you're right that it does, like, intimately connect back to the youth that we work with. Like, when I was doing peer support, like, I was working with young people who were undocumented immigrants, or like, one of the biggest providers here for like foster youth was
Morrison?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was housing,
They still are.
Yeah, or still is housing some of these migrant youth
who have been separated
who've been separated from their families. And then, I know one of the biggest triggers for burnout for me here was related to our houselessness crisis, when I was constantly having to call and be like, do you have room in your shelter for a youth tonight? And there never was, So, I mean, I think you make a great point of bringing up those larger systems of oppression. They definitely can contribute to burnout indirectly, and then very directly with the work we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think some of the burnout is not just like, do we mention it at work, but like even when we don't mention it at work, or if, you're the only person of color having a discussion with white folks about a youth of color, and they're not able to they don't automatically think of the bigger picture because they haven't, you know, they don't have that lived experience of racism, that can also contribute to burnout because it feels frustrating to have to explain things over and over again, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And I think being a peer too, like, and having to interact with a lot of non-peers in the greater systems we work in can definitely burn you out.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, let's move on. Okay, so here's some ideas for addressing burnout that I've used, and I bet you guys probably have some ideas too. These are things I used when I was a supervisor of peers and a peer. But like I would always have my staff when they started, if they were comfortable, kind of tell me some things that to look for that they knew were signs of burnout for them, and then I could kind of bring it up with them. Hey, I notice, you know, you seem really tired, or you're coming in 10 minutes late every day, or, you know, you're worn the same sweatshirt 5 times in a row, whatever. That's a real example, but like, whatever it was. And then if they were comfortable, then we could kind of have a conversation and talk about what steps they would what steps I could take to support them in addressing that burnout.
And that sounds pretty individualized because, like, I wear the same thing 5
Yeah.
days in a row, and that's like whatever. But if somebody is like specifically like, hey, if you see me wearing the same thing,
Yeah. Well, and I know, like, for me, like, if I, like, start dressing like a schlub or, like, you know, not wearing, like, makeup or whatever, then I know, like, I'm feeling pretty, like, down or, like, I don't give a shit anymore.
Yeah.
But, like, for other people, like, that's just their style and
I don't wear
whatever.
makeup.
Yeah, exactly. So it is pretty individualized. Knowing what agency supports are in place, you know, can you use your sick days for mental health time? What are the policies around taking leave if you need to? And FMLA, like, unfortunately, in my last organization, we only had like 47 employees, so I could not use FMLA. I found out.
Were you able to use the Oregon one? There's an Oregon one that's for
Yeah, I
smaller.
found that out later, but
Oh
they
my gosh.
did not make me
Well,
aware
that's
of that. Yeah. Knowing, like, who are people you can talk to, who are your supports. I feel like people who do the same work as you, who really get it, yeah, those can be great people to vent with, inside or outside of your agency, or just, you know, non-work supports, of course. And having a self-care plan, which we'll go over. And then being able to talk with your supervisor, if you need to, about, you know, what kind of accommodations can be made. So can you flex your hours? Can you take some time off? Can you work from home? Do you need to adjust your workload? Are there certain boundaries you need to set around, like, I need to turn my phone off on the weekend, you know, I'm not going to be on call. Maybe I'm going to forward my phone calls to a coworker. I know we would do that at my last organization. And one thing that was really helpful for me sometimes when I would just be, like, not feeling very connected to my work would be like, like when I went to go take a new training or a conference or something, that would kind of get me, like, reinvigorated of, this is why I do this. So sometimes if you can get those kind of professional development opportunities, that can be helpful. Go ahead.
It can be also helpful to have a plan for, like, preemptively, like, check in with your supervisor about, like, how do I bring this to you?
Yeah.
So, like, yes, there's the idea that the supervisor might be able to see signs and check in with you, but what about if you see it and you need to talk to the supervisor? So what's the best way to open that conversation with your supervisor? Because maybe you're like, hey, can we check in? And they're like, I have other people that I'm supervising who are, like, have youth in crisis, and I need to cancel our check-in. And then how do you say, like, no, really, I need to check in?
Yeah, this
Kind
is
of a thing.
important.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Have you ever talked to your supervisor about feeling burnt out and needing support, and how did it go? I think we already talked about the second one.
Yeah.
I've never used the words burnout with my supervisor, but I'm on partial family medical leave right now to take care of my spouse, and I've certainly talked about the stress of that, both financially and emotionally. And my supervisor has been super supportive.
That's great. That's really cool.
Way bigger than I could have hoped for, and that's been really nice.
That's great. I'm really glad you are able to have that conversation with your supervisor.
Yeah, and that you're accessing FMLA as needed.
Mhm.
It's a really valuable resource. I have had a conversation with my supervisors about being burnt out, and they were the ones that suggested FMLA for me. Well, HR, because we're a really big agency, and so HR was like, hey, talk about this. And it didn't go as well as I wanted, because I didn't necessarily want to take as much FMLA as they suggested that I do. But it ended up being really, really helpful. It just didn't go as smoothly as I wanted it to. But it was scary, because it was like, oh crap, like I'm feeling burnt out. That's why I'm not getting anything done. Now I have to talk to my supervisor, and so I called a meeting with my supervisor and head boss, and was like, all right, so I have to tell y'all that I'm burnt out, and what are you gonna do about it? I didn't have any idea of any of this stuff, of how to handle it or anything, and so it was very much a you don't know what you don't know moment, and so we all kind of learned together, and I think that's why it didn't go as smoothly as it could have. But now I know a lot more stuff, and so I haven't had to have that big, huge conversation. I've been able to go to my supervisor and be like, hey, not feeling great, gonna take a mental health day. And so it was a huge learning experience of just pacing myself, instead of I'd been riding a 6-month burnout, and then I was like,
wait till you crash and
guess
burn.
we're done.
Yeah.
But I was able to bounce back from that, because I was able to talk to my supervisor, and I did get the FMLA, and I did get the supports eventually that I needed. And that's why I'm a big believer that burnout doesn't have to be a career ender. Because even though it felt like a really big deal at the time, and it was a big deal at the time, I'm back from it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was in 2015. So since then, yes, I've experienced burnout, but it's been easier to manage.
Yeah. So it sounds like you learned a lot from
Yeah.
that experience. That's awesome. Okay, let's talk about trauma-informed care a little bit. So everyone's talking about trauma-informed care lately. But basically it's an approach that just says trauma exists, it has an impact on people, and the systems that are in place to treat trauma can actually re-traumatize people. And that trauma-informed care aims to be welcoming and engaging for both the people that are receiving services and the staff that are providing services. So a trauma-informed workplace recognizes that it's difficult to work with survivors of trauma and acknowledges burnout, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue, and recognizes the importance of self-care, but doesn't put it all on the staff to do self-care, basically. They're also going to have organizational policies that are going to address burnout and such.
Community care type stuff.
Yeah. So this is from Trauma Informed Oregon, who we share an office with. But this is just kind of some of the things that you might see in a trauma-informed workplace. So these are protective factors from against vicarious trauma and burnout. So like having a good team spirit. So like connecting with your coworkers, like feeling like a team, seeing changes as a result of your work, like if you're entering data on what you're doing, you feel like there's a purpose to it. It's not just going into the void. You feel like you're having an impact. You have training on trauma-informed care. You're receiving supervision at regular intervals, and it's meaningful to you. You have a balanced caseload, and you have the skills to manage stress. And then those are some of the risk factors down below, which you can see, like having a personal trauma history. That's common to peer support. Isolation can also be common to peers. Having to always be empathetic, that can feel like something that's expected of us. So some of the ideas they say are important for workforce wellness are, having a wellness plan, having certain rituals you can do as a team, and having a space for self-care in the office. So on Trauma Informed Oregon's website, there's like certain assessment tools you can use. They do free consultations in Oregon too. But basically, if your organization wanted to become trauma informed, you could kind of see like where we're at. And there's all sorts of different measures you look at, like, how is our environment? Like, is the wall paint look really clinical? Like, is there sufficient lighting? And then all down to like staffing and such. So like ideally this would come from the top down, but there are tools I feel like you can use, as a line staff or as a peer support to kind of shift the culture. When I was at my last organization, myself and one of my coworkers wanted our organization to become trauma informed, and my coworker was a youth partner and I was a peer, like middle management, peer support supervisor. So we consulted with Trauma Informed Oregon, and we brought, the assessments that we did ourselves on our organization, we're a peer-run organization, but so that gives us high marks, but we still didn't come off too great. But we brought, all the information we found to our leadership team and our exec team, and we basically did a presentation on, we want to become trauma informed. And in Oregon, they're going to require all organizations that receive funding from OHA to become trauma informed on certain measures you have to comply to within the next 3 years or something. Wow. Yeah. So they bought it. They agreed that they wanted to, but I don't know what actually happened with that, because I left the organization to come work here. But it was great to be able to use some of the tools to kind of say look, these are some easy steps we can take to kind of support it, and use the evidence in favor of trauma informed care and wellness or workplaces to say this prevents turnover, we're going to have our staff around for longer, and it's better for the young people we serve.
And I mean, maybe they say no thank you, kind of a thing, but there's still things you can do, not as management or anything. Of course, I can't come in and paint the walls. Yeah. But I can make my cubicle look really good. Kind of a thing, and make comfort in that, and so looking at the assessments, that was helpful for me actually when I was having the burnout stuff of just like how can I make my workspace a better place for me to be.
Yeah.
And, that was really helpful.
Yeah, or if you're feeling like there's just a culture of unwellness or, burnout, it can just be helpful to have tools like these to bring in evidence if you're having a conversation like that with your supervisor. This is just another one of these tools that just kind of says the basics of what a trauma-informed workforce is. Here's another one that says, like, how would you host a meeting? It kind of sounds like you were doing something like that, Julianne, with one of your task force, kind of talking about how to have better meetings, like sitting in a circle and stuff like that. And these are other
Change
examples.
the view of the screen so that we can see it bigger. Right now we can see a small version of the slide plus the next slide.
Oh, what? Wow. Okay.
Maybe swap them.
Sorry about that. Now can you see it?
Yeah, thank you.
Wow, I was probably doing that the whole time, huh? Yeah, so now can you see it a little better?
Yeah, way
So, yeah.
better. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Whoops.
We're getting this down, I swear. Every time we do better.
That's what I did when I was trying to see that.
Yeah.
Whoops. Okay. And then this is just one of those screening tools that says, basically it's like the roadmap to becoming trauma-informed as an organization, but they emphasize it's not like a destination. It's kind of something like once you get to phase 4, you're constantly
keep building on
implementing and monitoring and going back and, kind of assessing where you're at and doing better. So this is one of the things me and my coworker used to kind of see where we're at.
Can you email us those 2 documents?
Yeah, I'll email everything that we went over here. And when we looked at it, we were kind of stuck in here. We were not at agency readiness because it said something like, agency has a low level of organizational chaos. And we had a high level of organizational chaos, so that can be a roadblock.
Yeah.
So, how trauma-informed do you think your workplace is, and are there any, specific changes you think you would like to see in your workplace to make it more of, a culture of workplace wellness? I feel like our workplace is pretty trauma-informed. We were recently talking about, how there's a good culture of learning, where it's pretty comfortable to ask questions when you don't know, even though there's people here who are, PhDs. And then
I have no college degree yet.
Yeah.
I'm 1 term away from my associate's degree, but this is now the School of Social Work for both bachelor level and also grad level, but it was when I first started the Graduate School of Social Work, and so I was working with people who had master's level education, everybody around me, but with no degree, and I have pretty constantly felt comfortable being what does that word mean?
Yeah.
And then more and more I don't have to because people kind of get it and they stop being schmancy word users.
Yeah, I don't feel like there's a very academic pretension here, which is nice. And I do feel like there's a lot of support in place. In my last workplace, I felt like there was a lot of talk the talk of trauma-informed.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine to ask for mental health days, but then the upper management was modeling something else, where it's they were working 12-hour days. They weren't taking any vacations. They were, sending emails at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night where people were hearing one thing and seeing another thing, and then, people would I would call in and say, I need a mental health day, and it'd be like, well, if you take a mental health day today, then, we're not going to be able to have the drop open, or,
wow, that's a lot of pressure.
What if I, had strep throat, then you wouldn't be saying this to me, so, yeah.
Some of the things that I think would make a really big difference in my workplace are paying the peers on par with the other workers. Honestly, raising everybody's pay, because we are lower paid than the other agency that does similar work here. And also, even though we're supposed to be a youth-driven model, it's a very clinical model. And having such a clinical lens, I think, is not very trauma-informed, and also not very youth-driven, since youth aren't clinicians. And then finally, I think it would make a really big difference if we had outdoor workspace, so that we didn't have to be in a climate-controlled building, like that we could actually do our paperwork outside, and have access to the natural world. I think that would make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, that can have a great impact on, mood and mental health.
I work in cubicle land. I don't even have access to a window, so I definitely get that.
Totally.
It would be nice to be outside or see it.
Okay, well,
I'm thinking, does it make sense to do self-care next time? Because I want to go in depth, and we've got like 5 minutes.
Sure, yeah, we can save that for the next one, because we had a lot of good discussion on trauma-informed care and burnout, so
yeah.
Let's just skip to the wrap-up. So, does anyone want to share your biggest takeaways from today, or anything specific you want to talk about next time? Hopefully we can go over self-care a little bit, but anything else, like topics? We don't really have anything planned.
Well, my biggest takeaway was the idea of teaching my supervisor to recognize signs of burnout in me. It feels a little embarrassing to have that conversation, but I think it is useful, so I'm glad to have that as an idea. I'm assuming that what you do with us is you do the same topics with the supervisors. Is that true?
I don't think so. I think that the supervisor topics kind of come up with like what the supervisors say that they.
It comes from them, but so we had the first supervisor community of practice, and we went over all the topics that we've done with you all.
Like so we mentioned them?
Yeah, we did a brief review of all of them, and then they requested that they wanted to learn more about supporting peers to advocate for role clarity.
Okay.
So I think that's what the next one is going to be about, but it will only be their second one.
Okay. My supervisor says that they're very helpful, which is awesome. But she wants us to bring in what we're learning into supervision, but it seems, so maybe one of the things that I would love, I don't know if this is an individual thing or a thing for the group next time, but to be able to talk about how do we bring the things that we're learning into supervision, because if she was also learning about trauma-informed care, then we could talk together about what that looks like. But it's different if I need to teach her about what I learned and then discuss next steps, versus she's learned the same things as me and then we're just talking next steps, which both are fine, but it's just a different way to think about it.
Yeah, totally.
really what's on my mind is how to think about the climate crisis and peer support for youth. I think this is really a key thing because I'm 33 and I don't know how old you all are, how old other youth partners are, but for many of us who are older youth peers, when we were young, there was so much climate denial that we grew up in a very different world than the young people that we're supporting now, where there still is, but there's much less climate change denial. And so our young people are facing a much clearer and more horrifying picture of the world than I did. And that's not true across the board for everybody, but just trend-wise overall. So thinking about that, or thinking about how to make our work sustainable, which might fit into your goals of self-care, because there's the emotional sustainable piece, and then there's also, and like the organizational sustainability, but then there's also how we're part of a bigger movement in our work.
Yeah, that's kind of making me think, because we've definitely heard you want that, and we've tried to figure out how we can implement that, because I'm not sure, but I'm wondering, what do you think about if we had a topic of like peer support and like current events? Because I feel like we talked about some of that already, of just how that can lead to burnout even. But I think if we could go more in depth about that, and talk about like how current events impact peer work because it's impacting the youth that we're working with, and that includes climate change, that includes
gun violence.
Yeah, that is like those really big, hard topics. Maybe if we could talk about that, like supporting youth as they're experiencing that.
I think that's good. And then being able to talk about when we share lived experience and when we don't around those particular topics. Like, for example, I wasn't separated from my parents when I was small, but I support a lot of youth who are for various reasons. Or I experienced racism, and so do some of my youth. And also some of my youth are white and they enact racism. So it's how to support on all those levels would be really helpful.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a great idea. All right, well, we'll take that all into account.
Yeah, that might
gives me a
not.
lot to think about.
Yeah, that might not be this coming up one, but we will make sure that you know when it is for sure the topic, because I want to figure out how we're gonna do that well and in a way that actually addresses things instead of just being like, we're talking about this kind of a thing.
I super trust you all to do the order and timing of things that make sense. And just because I say I want something doesn't mean it's a great idea. You're more experienced, so I trust you to take in ideas and then do what makes the most sense.
I like this idea, and I think that we're gonna figure out how to make it happen. Definitely.
All right, well, thank you guys for being on the call today.
Yeah.
Next one will be Tuesday, August 13th.
Mhm.
I don't think I'm going to be on it.
No, it'll be just me.
Very bad. And then I'm going to send out attachments of all the trauma-informed documents I went over with you guys, and then I will also send out this video. Cool.
Could you also send out the links to all the previous videos and their topics? Because I know I've missed some and I never got a YouTube link for some of them, and I would love to catch up.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'll just include all of that in a mass link dump. All right. Well,
thank you so much.
Yeah, y'all have a great Tuesday.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
Bye.